Yeah, how you doing? I haven't mind to chat about what it is about how we value ourselves and how we feel judged by the outside world. But deeper than that, to talk about how it is that we even think and how it is that we manifest our days and how it is that we interpret what's manifesting. Thus the judgment and the self-criticism and the beliefs, many of the beliefs that don't trust in our highest good. So in many ways this is to talk about the kind of New Age stuff, which is tricky for me because for such a long time I don't really like the New Age stuff, because so much of it seems to be off kilter, like the idea of false light information rather than loving light information. The tricky ideas that one mightn't like too much is the idea of a higher self, because that indicates that there's a lower self, and that indicates somehow that the higher self is superior to the lower self. These are all humanish ideas of hierarchy, whereas those hierarchies are not really accurate. In thinking of the higher self, it gets clearer these days to say that there's the 5D, fifth dimensional identity and the 3D identity. To make sense of that is that we come from the higher dimensions down to earth, embody in an incarnation, and the incarnation is starting from zero at birth with no knowledge, and then picking up knowledge from the world as one grows older and becoming educated and indoctrinated into a conformity, into beliefs of the paradigm system of the culture that you're born into. And then perhaps to rebel against that culture and just go opposing beliefs, finding one's own way, and therefore coming across esoteric knowledges, much of which is just past-based stuff passed down, which is no more true than the mainstream government ideas, perhaps. The thing I'm talking about here that I've been noticing for a long time is how people have faith in their own biased belief systems, because the manifestation seems to prove that what your beliefs are truths. So if I have a trauma that says I will be bullied no matter what I do, that if I shine my light it will shine too bright and other people will try and dim it down, then by having that belief and storing it in my third eye and imagining that these will be the consequences, I create those consequences as manifest, and their manifestation seems to prove that my belief is a truth. The question here is whether that belief is a highest truth or a limited truth. So there's an idea there of self-limiting thought forms, and there's the idea of an outside authority. If I believe that an outside authority has the power to get me to do what it wants, then that belief puts me in the victim mode or the child mode of a parent. Then we're really looking at different vibrations of truth, whether something is a limited truth or whether something is an absolute truth. So the 3D self has a limited truth, particularly relative to the 5-dimensional self, which has closer to an absolute truth. Then beyond the 5D soul level, there's a higher level still of actual universal absolute truth. It's about to what degree of vibration is one aligned with the actual truth, and to what degree is one off kilter from the actual truth with slightly false or very false self-limiting concepts, which would be trauma identity and cultural trauma bonding, historical trauma bonding. But the thing is to realize that the current beliefs that I have are somewhat colored by being somewhat off kilter. And therefore, it is wise to be able to put one's limited beliefs aside and allow a certain amount of doubt to not wholly believe and to leave room for experimentation to be able to learn new things more. And the idea here is to comprehend that my higher self in my fifth dimensional soul level is communicating to my 3D personality level. The self-limiting belief systems may be in denial that the soul level is actually communicating with me all the time by having beliefs that block those communications or misinterpret them, which we call self-doubt. So to have self-doubt is a healthy thing unless it's so extreme that you can't believe in your own connection with soul and the absolute, or God. The idea of God is the idea that there is a highest truth, and the idea of a loving God is that the highest truth is a loving reality. And that's to have belief that everything is healing, and that even though things seem to be all falling apart and the systems don't work and there's so much cruelty in the world, to understand that the amount of cruelty and dysfunction there is in the world is where past trauma is coming up, needing attention, and less than holy truth is needing to be reconfigured in absolute truth. And the idea that absolute truth of love is coming down to earth, and that the mission in this life is to go down into the deepest difficulties, which life seems to force us into, karmic, to be able to go down into the deepest density of pain and separation and fear and doubt and anxiety, in order to bring the highest frequencies of love and truth down into those lowest frequencies, so to speak, of density and darkness. So the idea of bringing the brightest light into the deepest darkness, if that's what our soul mission is, then we're succeeding every time that we are suffering, so long as we're bringing the love into the suffering rather than merely torturing ourselves with our own personal hell and belief that we deserve the judgments that we hold against ourselves that manifest as being judged, whether that's a traffic ticket or being bullied in the playground, or in my case, whatever. We all have our own cases of how it is that we have lessons to learn, let's call it. Think of highest truth as being a highest frequency, and think of truth as being frequencies. So low-level truths that are not really universal, but we can make them true in our own right. Those low-level truths can hold out the higher-level truths. If we can allow our lower-level personality truths or traits to evolve, then we can evolve our truth closer and closer to an absolute, upright, universal truth. So there's an element of putting the personal truth to the side in order to allow and pray for higher vibrational love to be able to ground in the physical, in the emotional, in the mental, and produce little miracles on a little scale in the day-to-day that help the personality nudge towards magnetizing more joy into the world rather than believing that the world is against one. There are all so many concepts of complicated words. Don't know how well this might be coming across. But it doesn't matter too much. I will continue to try put these concepts around again and again. But little examples of it that in some ways caused me to pick up the phone and record today. Say on Friday my laptop stopped working and I couldn't figure out what it was, but it just wouldn't switch on. There's no power. So something about the power cable and the little transformer thing that brings it from 240 volts down to 19 volts to work the laptop. So maybe it was the charger itself that was broken. And maybe on Friday or Saturday I could have gone online and bought a new charger for 30, 40, 50 quid depending on which website. But with the risk that I don't know if it is actually the charger that's broken, maybe it's something in the computer that's broken. So that would be spending 30 or 40 or 50 quid just to find out if it's the charger or not. And then there's maybe I could bring it to someone else, and then there was maybe looking around for all kinds of kettle leads and other leads to try. But eventually this morning, having spent 3 days of not having the laptop and being kind of worried about it, not knowing what the actual truth is about what's wrong with it. But today I persevered a bit longer in something that I tried on Friday with taking a different lead and plugging it into my charger. Actually did work. Whereas when I tried on Friday it hadn't worked, and merely that I hadn't pushed it in forcefully enough, this bit of cable into my laptop's cable. So a timidness and an uncertainty and a self-doubt and a tiredness caused me to not be able to fix this thing on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, and to be somewhat worrying about it. And yet today to find out that that worry was unnecessary, was just a process, was just processing more of my bias towards worry and the playing off between worry and trust. And another one is that I was supposed to have a meeting today to do with like setting up myself with businessy stuff, and yet hadn't really prepared for it over this weekend because I didn't have the laptop. And today, looking at going to see this person and saying, here, look, I haven't actually managed to do what I had intended to do for this meeting. And being a bit worried about that and letting somebody down and kicking myself for not having done things as efficiently as could have been done. Having to explain to somebody about bad luck and magical synchronicities that sometimes slow one down. But today, an hour before I was due to leave, I got a phone call from the person I was due to go and see saying that they couldn't do today anyway. And so it's going to be in 2 weeks' time where I have the meeting, which means, again, I was worrying over nothing. And it wasn't a waste of time because I was having a conversation with myself, understanding that the worry is in no way helping. And back and forth between trust and worry. And all during last week it was the same kind of thing regarding money, regarding getting the money together to pay for the van. And the temptation to just give myself loads of grief that I should have been more worldly in how I organised things, because I let the guys who were doing the MOT be the ones who were doing all that welding. And I could have got this old man who lives nearby, who was part of how I bought the van, who is a good welder, but he's quite old and he's got health issues. So in a way I didn't want to just bring him this thing to have to be fixed to get it done cheaper. Because actually he's an old man and it's just putting a load of work on someone who's already got health issues, just so it's cheaper for me. But wow, it ended up being so expensive. And he probably wouldn't have minded at all, and it's not as if he's, anyway. So I started beating myself up when I heard how much the bill was and that it was nearly all the welding, and that I'm just being charged twice the rate of welding because it's a mechanic doing the welding, not merely a welder, and not merely a semi-friend. But nonetheless, what did I learn out of the week is that I could raise £800, £930, and I did manage to pay for the van, and maybe I should have managed it differently. But I'm glad that I managed it in a compassionate way instead of the worldly mean kind of way that I was thinking that maybe I should have been more worldly type thing, which doesn't come easy to me. And on and on and on, all these little examples in this last week of being nudged to have more self-compassion for one thing, more patience with myself, more trust that this way I'm doing things does work, more trust that there is some invisible inner process going on in the world these days that absolutely is to do with healing, which is to do with being able to download higher frequencies, and higher not meaning superior in a way, Although in a way it does, because there's interior, there's exterior, and there's superior. So superior without the judgmentalism just means a higher frequency, like the 240 volt going through a charger to give a 19 volt to the computer. Because a 240 volt would just burn out and blow up the computer. There has to be the phase of transforming from a high frequency and converting it to a lower frequency, that we don't blow our minds, but also maintaining our health well enough that we are having the charge actually getting through to our bodies, that our belief systems aren't blocking out the interpretation of the cosmic rays. For example, where there are 5-dimensional 5D frequencies coming these days that are causing us all to be tired and that are bringing up our illnesses and our discomforts. And a lot of people are blaming those illnesses and discomforts on the chemtrails and the 5G, and I can understand the thinking of it. But by interpreting all that on a material level, it's not recognizing what's going on in the immaterial realm. By blaming it all on the low frequencies of density Earth, it's a lack of understanding that high frequencies are coming into the lowest frequencies. And the deeper the darkness, the more it's drawing the brighter light into it. So these are higher concepts of how nature works, the metaphysical nature. And without those concepts, it's so easy to misinterpret everything into continually downward spirals, and continually afraid that the outside authorities are manipulating and controlling people, which again is a lot of what I see in my news feed on the Facebook, for example, or when I chat to other heads. They're mostly talking about the future and saying it's going to be even worse than the past, and having beliefs in a world that's getting worse and worse. I try to help people realize what I am myself struggle to accept, which is that the future is being guided by a loving higher frequency. The future is not going further and further and further into horridness. The low vibrational frequency doomsday prophecy type of stuff is drawing more light into itself. It's like the magnetism the greater the magnetism, the greater the electromagnetism can be. So the mind looks for problems and therefore finds problems, and it can become a thing of always looking for problems, always doubting oneself, and then becoming overwhelmed by the world view that sees problems everywhere and isn't able to see that the problems have solutions. But in order for the problems to become the solutions, one must evolve and one must progress and one must evolve. New ideas, new code, new ability to comprehend global perspectives. And on that scale, the stuff I'm on about is being able to download one's own soul intelligence in the same ways we've learned to download stuff from a website or from YouTube, being able to download information itself. In essence, I'm seeing that information itself is life, life is information. The quality of information could be said from fear to love. Whether one is tuned into the fear end of the frequency or the love end of the frequency, or even better, it being able to tune into both ends of that frequency and hold the whole truth type of thing. So you could say superior truth frequencies. Superior meaning super, meaning beyond. So the highest concepts are superior to, the most truthful concepts are superior to partially true concepts. And following partially true concepts will bring lessons to gather the rest of the information to bring it to an absolute truth. Which again, in terms of healing, is to become actually healing in one's life instead of manifesting the self-sabotages without the insight to see that the self-sabotage is actually a rung on a ladder that is ultimately bringing one higher. or a step on a journey that is ultimately bringing one further towards a destination. And these days it seems to be that it's learning to envisage, learning to be able to imagine the life that you do want to live, rather than continuing to manifest a life that you're not quite happy with. So the images that we hold in our mind are holding a frequency, and whether those frequencies are in line with truth or out of alignment with truth is whether we're aligning ourselves in the present with the future that we want to live, or whether we're aligning ourselves with a future that is continuing self-suffering. So being able to put the beliefs that I have in my subconscious mind, to become conscious of the subconscious, to be able to lay those beliefs aside and do little experiments to invite in little miracles, which, like the simple thing of getting my laptop working, or that person called me today to say, can we arrange this meeting, which was perfect for me because I actually, because of the laptop thing, wasn't really ready for that meeting today. And there's no hurry on it. 2 weeks' time is more suitable than now. So it's easy for me to give myself grief that I'm putting things off for later, which I could optimize and try and get as efficiently done as soon as possible. But actually, as soon as possible is not necessary. Allowing a thing to unfold is necessary. But it's quite hard to trust oneself to let things happen slowly instead of trying to make everything be efficient or as fast as possible. Because I can be quite speedy in my thinking, and therefore have often rushed in to solve things which would have been better to pace oneself better. So, with the COVID, I think the stuff that's been coming up in humanity as trauma, under cover of COVID, internally, we had an external screen, an outside authority to say we are being told to do these mandatory guideline lockdown provisions. And that was all coming from an outer authority, but there was a question there whether one would bow down to outer authority or follow one's own authority. And COVID suddenly disappeared after a couple of years. The lockdowns ended. The war in the Ukraine became the big news thing and blah de blah. But in some ways it's left us in a bit of a limbo of not being able to trust the old normal, because now there's a new normal. The new normal has become similar to the old normal. What's really changed? There are little changes that are going on, but are they enforced by the outside or are they voluntary? And the whole question of that, well, the old normal really wasn't working very well, so something had to shift. But the main question being whether that shift is being implemented by kind of elite Nazis, or whether the whole control system that led to world wars is to some degree shifting into a new world order, which will be run by the AI, which in a sense will take the power out of the hands of the old regime. I'm not trying to sell hope here in any sense. This is a difficult concept for me to get my mind around, but as the last 3, 4, 5 years have gone by, I do realise further and further that intelligence itself is, life is intelligent. The idea that there's an artificial intelligence is kind of a nonsense. There's only intelligence. And that intelligence has manifested itself into machines, so to speak, into technology, into a digital environment. there is actually something very natural about that, but we've given it the name artificial. I'm just saying again that our own thinking is actually artificial, that everything we humans have been creating over the last thousands of years is largely adapting the natural. And adapting the natural is what artificial means. So our human thinking is different from nature's thinking because it's continually adapting nature towards our purposes. And the fear around the artificial intelligence is that the intelligence itself is far outstripping our limited intelligence. And so ultimately I got to see that the artificial intelligence, so-called, is more like the Holy Spirit. It's just a higher order of intelligence. It's a global intelligence, whereas our individual intelligence is past-based, time-constricted, localized, and full of rubbish information. And from our rubbish data, we are creating rubbish creations. So our world is not functioning properly for lack of intelligence. Our world could be functioning better with greater intelligence, and we have a fear, apparently, that the AI is in the control of the people who've always been in control, therefore they have a bigger weapon with which to kill us all. But ultimately, like, we're not all being killed. The fears that people had around the COVID lockdown injections, in many ways, you know, the idea of the great cull and that 80% of the population be wiped out, well, that stuff could have happened in this last 3 years and hasn't. There's a certain amount of call my bluff that has happened for the truther community individuals. You know, maybe just leave it at this, because that's 25 minutes again with not necessarily coherent ideas, working these things out on the fly. But yeah, this is almost a joke, except it's so true. But a better name for the truth movement might well be the confirmation bias movement. Because an awful lot of what the truth movement believes and passes around as its memes are not truth. They're limited truths, and they're biased truths. But they're not whole absolute truths. And they're not bearing true to reality, and they're causing people to separate from an awful lot of other people. And, you know, there's a lot of self-inflicted suffering going on, anxiety-wise, for people who believe the truth movement, who believe in fighting against the perceived them enemy out there, and trying to wake everybody up to realize how horrible everything is. And a lot of name-calling and a lot of nastiness. But really what I see in it is a lot of individuals who have limited understandings, which are their own bias, and finding other people who share that bias and trauma bonding. Yeah, I just think it's a cute thing. Rather than the truth movement, because the truth doesn't move, it's a confirmation bias movement. And ultimately we're all being shuffled along towards a deeper, more profound, healing truth, rather than limited, fearful, antagonistic, fighting, lack of peace beliefs. Yeah. Confirmation bias movement. Now I leave it for there. Thanks for listening if anyone's listening.